So today, okay, how many of y'all, did anybody here get a tax refund? Or you got one on the way? I don't know. Did you get one? Got one? You know, tax refunds, I mean, you know, to get a check in the mail, isn't that more fun than getting a bill in the mail? So receiving is fun, and getting a tax refund is fun, or getting an unexpected check in the mail is fun. And here's the deal. As believers, answered prayer is absolutely fun. However, the flip side is unanswered prayer is hugely disappointing. In Philip Yancey's book, very, very popular writer in the Christian realm, wrote a book called Disappointment with God. Written a lot of really good books. He even wrote a book on prayer. And he wrote a book on grace. But thousands of his readers wrote him. And boy, I mean, he hit a nerve. And they said, and these are the three questions that Christians are asking about God. And they sent them to him. And here's what he said. Is God unfair? Number two, is he silent? He's not answering my prayers. And then, is he hidden? I see no evidence of his presence in my life. Because what would happen is believers, let's say it's a teenager or a college-age student or a young married, and their parents are thinking about divorce, and he or she, they pray, their parents get divorced. Well, God didn't answer my prayer. Somebody gets sick and stays sick. I mean, listen, if you knew the number of believers who become unhappy in their Christian faith, because, you know, once again, we are studying the life of Hannah. We have one more week to go. She had every reason to be unhappy. Barren for several years, no kids, taunted by her husband's second wife. And I mean, it was just bad. Public humiliation, you name it. But the fact is, you're going to ask for some things, but will you receive? That's the kicker. That's the kicker. And Hannah prayed, and ultimately she did receive. She asked, and then she received. And during her time of asking, it was a period of great anxiety and vexation. Now, there are people who are praying for big things or whatever, but life's pretty much on a roll anyway. So if that prayer doesn't get answered, they're going to keep rolling. Are you with me? But I want you to put yourself in the shoes of somebody under great stress, anxiety, and just emotionally distraught. And when they're praying for something, it's way different if it doesn't get answered. You with me? Boy. Well, during those troublesome times, the biggest outlet is your prayer time with God. That's it. That is your biggest outlet. And I know you might try to medicate your soul with extra food, movies, shopping. Prayer is going to be your greatest outlet. So let's look at this morning as we wrap up chapter 1 of 1 Samuel. And I want to just talk about 4 words a little bit. And number 1 is asking. So I want to jump ahead to the end to verses 27 and 28. And here's what we see. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me petition. Circle the word petition. That I made, circle the word made, to him. Therefore I have lent, circle the word lent, him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent, circle that word, to the Lord. Now, all 4 of those words have the root form of the word to ask. Now, when the writer, and you've heard me say this numerous times, when the writer uses a word a lot, That's what he's trying to drive home. And there are 7 times in this passage, and we just looked at 4, where you find the word or a form of the word to ask. So you have to ask. You're like, I got that down, been asking for a long time. Okay, but I just want you to know you do have to ask. Hey, some people don't ask. That James said, you have not because you ask not. Can you think about that? You may not be praying for something that God wants to give you. Now, the reason I point that out is because when you translate from another language, it's not always easy to put it into the language you're putting it into smoothly. I mean, you go back and read those words and try to put any form of ask in there, and it just doesn't flow. But when you translate, that's what you have to do. For instance, when I was in Kenya, and you may have heard me say this before, I was speaking, and the Kenyan wanted to translate for me because it's kind of like an ego thing. I mean, for them to translate somebody from America to their peers is like, I can do it. So he's there, and the missionary let him do it, and he's a pretty good translator until I said something was pretty ugly. Now, he just stopped and looked at me. Because now think about that. He didn't know how to translate that into Kenyan. Well, at that point, the missionary I was serving with, Tommy, he came up and says, I'll do it. So Tommy came up and he knew exactly how to translate it. Now, he didn't use the Kenyan word for pretty or the Kenyan word for ugly. But he knew what I was saying, so he was able to say it. You got that? So when you read that's why some translations differ, because you can say something 2 or 3, 4 different ways. And that's why it's good to find a translation that you're comfortable with. Anyway, so that's why I just point that out. Now, also, you back up to verse 17. Eli said, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition. Once again, a form of the word asking that you have made. Another form of asking to him. All right. So she's asked and asked and asked and asked. But it can be risky to your faith to ask. Listen, it's happened. Listen, even your own parents, there are probably things you did not ask for because one time you asked for something and the answer was no, and you just don't like to hear the word no, so you don't ask. And there have been times, and you as a parent, you say, well, I wish they had asked. Well, maybe your kid didn't ask because they just didn't think you would say yes. Now, it can be risky to your faith to ask because God may not answer it with a yes on your timetable. Certainly didn't for Hannah. And as many believers told Philip Yancey, they were disappointed with their faith. You don't want to be disappointed. God is good, as we say all the time. God is a God of grace. He's got it figured out. In next week's message, should all come together. Now let's pick up the story where we left off last week. All right? We left off at the end of verse 18, so let's pick it up in verse 19. All right, so they rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. You could circle that word, worship. That's a huge word in the text. Then they went back to their house at Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her, and in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel. For she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. And that's what Samuel's name means. Now, Carol had a similar experience. More on that in a moment. But when you get a big answer to prayer, you are ecstatic. Are you not? You are like, wow. So let's keep moving. The man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. That's about a 3 to 4 year process. or he would be 3 or 4 years old. Only may the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull. Circle that phrase, 3-year-old bull. An ephah of flour and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. And she said, "Oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." And he worshiped the Lord there. Without a doubt, asking and receiving can be the highlight of your Christian walk. Answered prayer is an incredible thing. I'll just share a couple quick things. When I was, this was back around 1980-ish, and an evangelist asked me if I'd like to travel with him, but I would need a travel trailer and something to pull it. Well, I got a travel trailer from my brother-in-law at the time. It was old and used, but it was fine, and so I got that. And but I didn't have a vehicle to pull it with, and I couldn't afford one. I couldn't afford one. Now, at the time, I knew that my dad, who I worked for, he could afford one. You think, wow, well, Dad doesn't get you everything. I know. But I was outside in the summertime, or it was warm anyway, and I was creosoting the fence out near the road, and I had a lot of fence to creosote. So I'm out there praying one Saturday, and there I am praying. I'm saying, "Lord, there's no way I can afford it." I said, "Now, if you want me to travel, you've got to provide a van. And you're going to have to probably lay it on Dad's heart to buy a van for me, because I can't do it." So Mom and Dad had been out that day. I don't know what they'd been doing. So they got home that afternoon, and Mom told me. My dad didn't tell me, but my mom did. My mom says, "Well, Dad and I were talking. Dad's going to buy you a van to pull the trailer." Now, it was a plain van, stripped, the 2 front seats, and empty. But it's the van, and it would pull my trailer. Now, that was huge. Do you think I've ever forgotten that? No. Because I asked for something, and I didn't ask my dad. Let me give you another illustration. And I don't always do this, and I don't like to ask people for stuff or money. I know as a pastor, you're like, you got to ask, or okay, I've never been good at that, and maybe that's been one of my faults, all right? So anyway, I knew a missionary, Tommy Moore in Kenya, and I had been over there for a couple of weeks. Anyway, I was home, and, I had been engaged. I wasn't engaged any longer, and, I've told that story. So I'm at home, and so in the spring of 1982, I'm single. I hadn't met Carol, and I'm like, I'd love to go back to Kenya, right? So I prayed, and I said, "Lord," I said, "I'd like to go back to Kenya, but I am not going to ask Tommy if I can come. If you want me to go to Kenya, I'm going to have to get a letter from him asking me to come, and there will be no hint on my part ahead of time that I want to come. This has to be like from him out of the blue." April, I get a letter from him in the mail. And I say, "Hey, Mike, would you like to come live with us for a year and help me plant and build churches?" Wow, I think I'm going. So that's what I did. Incredible answer to prayer. So, it's like, wow. And then I'll give you one more bonus illustration because it goes along with the text. Carol and I had 4 kids, and you probably know the story by now, most of you. And, okay, everybody in here would agree that 4 kids is plenty. I'm sure, because, unless you had 5 or 6, and you didn't. So I thought 4 was plenty. And Carol did not And so she wanted to have a fifth child, and I don't remember, but she does. And she says, I was adamant with a definitive, no, we're done at 4. Now, we do have 5 kids. Now, here's the deal. Carol never said really anything to me and didn't bow. She took it to the Lord and said, God, if you want us to have 5 kids, you are going to have to change Mike's heart, which he did. In fact, I told Gabe the other day, this came up, and Gabe says, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. I'm like, every breath you take is an answer to prayer. How could you forget that you wouldn't be here outside prayer? Think about that. I mean, literally, he doesn't exist outside of prayer. And I think, wow, what are you not asking for? Wow, that God would like to give you. I mean, I've got physical, tangible proof in our family that prayer works. Prayer works. Prayer works. Now, does that mean Carol and I get everything we ask for? No. No. But it sure is fun when you get a big answer. You have to admit. You have to admit. And then I think, well, what if Carol had acquiesced to me and said, okay, you're right, probably 4 is enough. No, listen. If God puts something on your heart and you have an internal desire, don't be too quick to give it up. You know what I'm saying? All right. Anyway, so what are you not praying for? I mean, Hannah went from barrenness to brokenness and to blessing and bounty. I mean, it was incredible. And God solved her crisis in an unexpected way. That's what God usually does. You know, because a lot of times, here's what I know, you get into a crisis, you got it all figured out. Well, God says, that's not what I was thinking. I got a different game plan. Usually it works out a little bit differently, all right? Look, Joseph was in a prison cell for a long time. That's probably not the guy you would tap on the shoulder to be in charge of Egypt, second in command. Gideon and his army of 300. That's not who you would choose to take on an army of thousands. God just has an uncanny way of doing things in an unexpected way. And now we come to Hannah. Just a nobody, really. A woman with no kids, and you look down and you say, I think I'll use her, and you wouldn't. That's not who you would pick. We don't do things like that. Of course, we're in America. I get that. We look for the powerful and the influential. That's who we go after. And I wonder how many nobodies had incredible potential, but they were overlooked by others. I don't know. Well, asking is where it starts, and now we get to the hard part, and that's waiting. Because when you pray, rarely does the answer come in the next 5 minutes. So you have to wait. I recently watched part of the NFL draft where 256 players are chosen by the 32 teams. Now, not everybody can be the first pick, all right? Somebody is number 256. Some are number 250. There are guys that went on to make millions that were chosen near the very end, like 250 or later. How about that? So, but you know what? Think about it. You had to wait a couple days to get to the 7th round. You had to wait. And there are people who got picked in the 2nd round and thought they would go in the 1st round. And it was so hard to wait. But here's the deal. If you watch stuff like that, you're like, well, I can't believe this guy wasn't already picked. But see, what you and I don't know, we don't know the backstory. We don't know that this guy maybe had a DUI in college. Not that that would ultimately matter, but they try to look at all the details, just see if there's any patterns and all that. And there's a lot of other things that go on. And I think the problem when it comes to waiting on God, we don't know the backstory. God's like, well, why would I do that for you now when I'm getting ready to do this later on? I mean, I'm not even fooling with that. Well, see, we're not privy to the backstory. We have no idea what God is thinking. But that's what makes it hard to wait, because we're confined to our own thinking, our own trouble, our own crisis, our own barrenness. And we don't know what God has planned. But you have to admit, Hannah's son Samuel becomes a highly respected judge and a kingmaker. He is the one who God uses to anoint Saul and then David as king. She never would have dreamed that. She just wanted a son. That's it. God says, I'll do better than that. We just don't know the backstory. I mean, we struggle. Psalm 40, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. You know, I'm not so sure that we ever truly learn patience, but it is a must in our prayer lives. Why does God make us wait? I can't tell you. Don't have all the answers. But just understand that while you're waiting, God does use prayer to shape history and fulfill his purposes. And that's not all. In Exodus chapter 32, Moses just got fed up with the children of Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, because he was kind of done with them too. I've seen this people, and behold, it's a stiff-necked people. Now therefore leave me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. Now, you get the picture. God says, okay, I'm done with Israel. Moses, let's do this. How about if I use you. I just start all over, and you are the founder of a brand new nation. Okay, how about that? Now, for a lot of us, sounds like a good idea to me, God. Yeah, I'm done with these people too. I mean, you know what? I am done with their complaining and their bickering and their unhappiness and all that stuff. Let's just start over, me and you. Now, doesn't that sound like a plan? Well, that's not what Moses did. Moses is like, man, who would have thought we could have got rid of all these extra grace required people, EGRs? Man, and right away we'll just get rid of them. But no, Moses prayed, says, no, God, don't do that. Give them one more shot. Verse 14, after Moses prayed, the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on his people. Prayer. I mean, it changes things. It really does. And Hannah did not allow her waiting to negatively affect her faith, which ultimately led to worship. It was never far away. She was regular and faithful in her worship. And the text even ends with the word worship. I mean, it was a way of life for Hannah and her family. Ultimately for Samuel, she was a lifer. She was. And it's hard to be a lifer because life wears you down at some point. Especially when it appears that God has left the house. Now in Psalm 22, had this prayer. Psalm 22 is a prayer. I mean, the Psalms is a prayer book. And here's what we read in Psalm 22:1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Now, you don't have to raise your hand. You ever pray that? That's in the Bible. There's a reason it's in the Bible. Because when you are lost for words, just pick out a good Bible prayer. And who hasn't suffered hardship? Do you know that Jesus prayed these same words on the cross? Why? Because he knew that Psalms was the prayer book. And so when he didn't know what to pray, he turned to the Psalms. And he said to God, you can read it in the New Testament. He said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Right out of the Old Testament. Right out of the prayer book of the Old Testament. I mean, when life is down and your self-esteem is in the tank, look at Psalm 22:6. I am a worm and not a man. So when you can't even find the words to describe how you feel about yourself, just use the word worm. You know what I'm saying? Feel like a worm. Everybody just stepping on me, squashing me. In fact, he goes on to say, man, when people in present realities are against you, look, he says, I'm scorned by mankind, despised by the people, and all who see me mock me. They make their mouths at me and they wag their heads. Hannah experienced all of that. All of that. And then waiting gets even harder. Like little kids on vacation. Can't wait to get there. And we're like, God, could you hurry up? That's not in his vocabulary. There's a translation gap there when you tell God to hurry. I know we do, but you're like, I don't even understand that word. Yeah. So Hannah becomes a member of the 4-H club. When I was in school, there were people in the 4-H club. It was more agricultural then, but the 4-H's stood for heart, head, hands, and health. All right? Well, in your prayer life, the 4-H club, and let me give you the 4 words. Number one, the first H is helpless. Helpless. Hannah has tried for years to get pregnant. She can't. Helpless. It ain't happening. All right? Second H, honest. Honest. She has laid out her emotions and bared her soul to the Lord. Totally honest and humble. She admits, God, I'm just your servant. I'm willing to do whatever you, if you want me to stay barren, that's fine. I really want a son, but I'm. But she was hopeful because she continued to pray and wait. Now, after her prayer too, she was still trying to get pregnant. The Bible tells us she went home and actually slept with her husband, because you can't just pray. You do have to do your part. Like if you've got an unchurched friend, you do have to actually invite them, probably to get them to come, because they probably won't call you up and say, hey, I noticed you went to church Sunday morning. I think I'd like to go with you next week. Doesn't normally happen like that. Now, for some people it does, but it's never happened to me. It may never happen to you. So you probably will have to verbally invite somebody. And then Hannah gets to the fun part, and that's the receiving part. Now, I will say this before I go on, but you know what? After you receive, there's going to be more things you're going to ask for. This is like a never-ending cycle. Once you receive one thing, okay, I talked about the van I got. Am I done? Seriously. Was I done in 1980-ish because I got a van? No. Was I done after I got the letter from Tommy Moore? No. This is like asking and receiving is a way of life. A way of life. So receiving. And Hannah had made a promise, and I'm not saying you have to make an incredible vow to get your prayer answered. Okay, that's personal between you and God, but not everybody makes a promise, keeps it. Hannah kept hers, and some of you saw the story or read the book Unbroken, when Louis Zamperini was shot down, was in the Pacific Ocean for several weeks with no food and just a little bit of water, and one of his guys died in the little raft they had, and he promised God out there. He said, God, if you ever get me out of this mess, I'll serve you the rest of my life. But after he got out of prison camp and the war was over and all that, he got home and he forgot. Forgot he made that promise. Had marital problems, drinking, and then his wife came back. She had left him. She came back, and she said, why don't you go with me to a Billy Graham crusade? He didn't want to go, but he went. Committed his life to Christ, and then he remembered what he told God. And he went on to serve God in youth ministry for over 50 years. Had an incredible testimony past the age of 95. But he did fulfill his vow. Now, vows are not mandatory, but how do you respond when you receive? Once again, let's learn from Hannah. Learn from Hannah. Now, really, this is like over-the-top gratitude. Here's what she said. I am giving to the Lord because God gave to me. Now, generosity can be hard to measure at times. Because we, in the New Testament, remember people were coming by putting in big checks, and then this widow came along and put in a couple pennies, but she gave all she had. And Jesus said, wow, she is generous, the other guys aren't. I mean, it's not always the dollar amount, but so generosity is not always easy to measure. Now, if you went back, I told you to circle the phrase a 3-year-old bull. Now, here's the deal. In the Hebrew, it says 3 bulls, like 3 bulls. But do you know what? A lot of people in older translations that were done a couple thousand years ago on the Hebrew text, see, a lot of them thought, there's no way she gave that much. There's no way she would give 3 bulls. That doesn't even make sense. And it does say in verse 25 that she sacrificed a bull. So they just translate it as a 3-year-old bull because nobody gives 3 bulls. She's not that rich. But now think about it. She's giving her son. She took her son at the age of 3 or 4 to the temple there where Eli was the priest and said, hey, here he is. He's a lifer. I've given him to God and his servant for life. That's over-the-top generosity to give your son up that early in life. Well, Hannah goes on after that to have several more kids. Because God is so good. I mean, I don't know why people struggle with her over-the-top generosity when they know she gave her son. Which reminds us of God who gave his only son for our sins. That's over-the-top generosity. God's already modeled it for us. Boy, I mean here, look, these stories in the Old Testament tell us, look, the story, it's not about Hannah. It's not about Samuel. I know it is, but it's not. It's about God. And how truly generous he is. And how he cares for his own people. Hannah was broken and barren. No claim to fame. Listen, she's a nobody. She's married, but to have no kids in agrarian society, there's no contribution. She's making no contribution to the family. Wow. And the public humiliation she had is incredible. But here's what I know too. God continually works out his purposes through everyday faith, through his righteous people, you, me, that's it. Just normal, everyday, ordinary people. That's what he did in Hannah's life. But she wrestled with God for years until the answer came. Wrestling is tiring. It's tiring. There's a story in the Old Testament where Jacob wrestled all night with God. Listen, I wrestled a little bit in high school. My boy Adam wrestled some in high school. I mean, they're like 2 minutes rounds or 3, and you're tired. You need a break. So you take a break, then you go to round 2, and Jacob wrestled all night. And here's the deal. You know what? When you wrestle with God, you get tired. But Jacob, there was this night, and he was going to meet Esau, and he knew that Esau's last words were, I'm killing Jacob. So he was fearful for his life. And here's what we read. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and set them across the stream and everything else that he had. And then Jacob was left alone. And the man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. All night long, Jacob wrestled. And the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob. And he touched his hip, and Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled. And Jacob said, let me go. Or God said, let me go, for the day is broken. And here's what Jacob said. I'm not quitting. I am going to wrestle you unless you bless me. I mean, how long can you hang on to your prayer? I don't know. Jacob says, no, I'm not letting go unless you bless me. That was Hannah's thoughts. No, God, I mean, I've prayed for 5 years. Yeah, I can't have a child 5 years. I'd say chances are it's pretty obvious I'll never have a child. And she continued to wrestle with God until he blessed her with a child. So here's how I want to close today. Do you have a big issue right now that you're wrestling with? Just one. You don't need 5 or 10, just one. One. And we've learned a lot about prayer from Hannah's life, from her prayer. And look, there are no magic formulas because God's sovereign and God treats us differently and he answers differently and God uses us differently and all that. But here's the homework. I want you to pray at least 3 times this week about your trouble. Now, you may pray 7 times. That's fine. You may pray 20 times. That's fine, too. And then I want you to be honest with God about how you feel about him, your circumstances, and yourself. Okay? Because how do you think Hannah felt? Like a worm, huh? She'd have used that word, I bet, if Psalm 22 had been written earlier. And then I want you to tell God about something you expected him to give, but he didn't. I'm just trying to help you in your prayer life to have these open, honest conversations. And then when you pray, I want you to express not only the negative dimensions of your life, but I want you to express the positive. You are breathing, right? That's pretty positive. You are alive. Because here's the deal. If you get so hung up on what you don't have and the prayer that's not getting answered, you tend to forget the good stuff and the positive. And you know what? I'll bet you, let's just say I'll use the number 3. Let's say you have 3 big troublesome issues. You have 300 probably positives. Are you with me? I know those 3 get all the attention. And listen, I get that. Hannah, that's what got her attention. That's what we're told about. My only point is, let's also express the positive things in your life when you pray. And then hold on. You may need to. You may need to wrestle until the answer comes. Well, next week we have one final message on Hannah, and I want to talk about the God of great reversals. Anybody who's been divorced wanted a reversal. Anybody, who lost a child needs a reversal. I mean, listen, folks, at some point, and you know the funny thing about life? They say you learn best when you're in the moment. If you're not in need of a great reversal, you're like, well, that doesn't really sound appealing to me. What if 5 years from now you need a great reversal? You think, well, I don't know where to turn, what to go. Surely there's something in the Bible. And you start looking, you don't know where to go, where to find it. I'm telling you right now, the God of great reversals is what we're going to talk about next week. And so you probably know somebody that you could invite because they would love to experience a great reversal in their life. That's the topic next week. Today was asking and receiving. And I hope you will be able to write down some big answers in your life. Let's stand for prayer.